Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new Quilty Box video. I just received my Quilty Box for June 2017 and it's filled with fun gear from Masako Wakayama. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. So let's check out the box and see what we're going to make together this month. Just in case you've never heard of Quilty Box, basically this is a box of fun gear that arrives every month, and all of the items included in the box are picked by a different quilting designer. So this month's designer is Masako Wakayama, and she is a Japanese quilter that designs American style quilts. I think that's really cool. So she's included this really beautiful quilt pattern, very traditional blocks, and I think there's a bonus quilt pattern in here. Yep, using hexes. So that's going to be really nice to play with. And speaking of hexes, we've got this little template here to cut out some hexagons. We have some Cosmo embroidery floss, and I read the other sheet. I think that this is like a zipper pull. So it's really nicely made, you know, just wonderful little extra bits that we get in our box. But the main event, of course, is the fabric. And this is always my favorite part. So I'm going to unknot it and open it up, and we're going to check it out. So these are some of Masako's fabric line. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. So the theme for this was just everything we love. And so here's some glasses and things. It says wildflower. It's a really small print. It's very, very tiny. Tiny little designs, and then here we've got green, fresh, herb. So it has kind of a cooking, breeding theme to it. I think that's really cool. So we have lots of fat quarters here. Like I think there's a total of 11 fat quarters, and then this, it almost looks like a recipe. I think I haven't looked through it to see if it actually is something you could follow, but that's kind of cool. And then this is a hexagon print, and it talks about honeybees. So that's cute. Here's another version of that herb print. So lots of low volume prints here. A lot of fun things that you can do with that. And then I think we have some squares as well. So a mixture of fat quarters and some squares. And then here's the thing I've been most excited to see. This is a quilting panel. So let's check out this panel. Oh my gosh, this is so cute. It is wildflower across the top, and we've got a mixture of flowers and house, and there might be some birds. We've got a little bug down here. That's kind of cute. You know, a lot of different little Easter eggs. And then here at the bottom, we have some books and a cup of tea and some glasses. So really just a really cute design overall. So I'm going to take a look at all of this stuff. I'm going to turn off the camera and figure out what we're going to make with this beautiful fabric this month. So here's what we're going to make this month. We're going to take that beautiful wildflower quilt panel and add a flying geese border. And I'm calling this quilt Geese in the Wildflowers. So let's learn how to piece this together. The first step to this quilt making process is to trim down your fabric panel. I have cut my wildflower panel down to 24.5 by 34.5. And how I did this was by folding it in half and using a long ruler to trim off those edges. And I'll be honest, this was tricky, and it ended up cutting off more than I expected off the sides. And this is just one of those things you kind of have to play with and just take your time on. I did end up having to cut off just a little bit of the design over on this side. I think that's fine. It's still going to look great. It's still going to come out wonderful. So that is the quilt panel cut down, and the size is pretty specific. I wanted a multiple of 2, so that way I could easily attach my borders. So multiple of 2, 24 and 34, and then the extra 1/2 inch is seam allowance. So this way I can create a border using 2.5 inch flying geese units and these cute flying geese corner units, and this is how we're going to build our border. So the next step is to learn how to piece these flying geese. To create a flying geese unit, you're going to need a rectangle of background fabric, and I'm using this solid white fabric, and then 2 squares, and I'm using the blue fabrics included in this month's Quilty Box. So you take those fabrics and mark a diagonal line from corner to corner on the back side. going to take one of those squares, place it on top of the rectangle. We're going to take this to the machine and stitch right on top of that marked diagonal line. So here at the machine, I'm just making sure that these fabrics are nicely lined up along that back edge and these two sides. And I like to get started here in the middle. I find oftentimes when I start stitching on the tip, it'll just kind of go weird. It'll get sucked down into the machine and cause the machine to gag. I also like to start on this little scrap of fabric. That enables me to get straight stitching, and if the machine is going to gag, it's going to happen on that little scrap of fabric and not on the back of my flying geese. So I'm stitching right on top of that marked line, and I'll grab another scrap of fabric and stitch on it. And that reduces your bobbin thread waste. You know, your bobbin thread, that's the thing that you run out of most quickly, and this helps keep it organized and reduces thread breaks and thread waste. So now I'm going to take the top flap of that square and fold it over along that stitching line and give it a good crease with my fingernails. So this is half of our flying geese stitched. We have a few layers of fabric here. We have our background rectangle. I want to leave this in place because it's going to be the exact correct size for the flying geese unit, and it's good to leave it there. But I don't need this little flap, extra flap of our blue fabric. So I'm going to trim this away. That's just extra, you don't need it. And then now we have just our piece of blue fabric folded down over our rectangle. And the reason I do this is that no matter how perfectly you stitch this, it might not come out just exactly the correct size. And you can see I have just a little bit of white fabric extending beyond the edge. If I was to cut the white fabric, I wouldn't, the unit would no longer be as accurate. So when piecing these together, I always leave that background rectangle in place. It makes it a lot easier to piece and a lot more accurate. So now the next step is to place our second square on the second side. You're going to take this to the machine and stitch along that marked line just the exact same way. And here's what that will look like. So I've stitched that in place, and now I'm going to fold that triangle over, and again, give it a good finger crease. I'm running my fingernail along it. You can also use, any kind of creasing tool, that works too. Now flip up and trim this extra fabric away. If you're mass creating these, sometimes a rotary cutter and ruler might be a little bit faster. I like scissors, just simply whenever I'm working on a single one, it's convenient. So that's how we're going to work all of our flying geese. You're going to create dozens of these. So for the short sides, you're going to need a total of 12. For the longer sides, you're going to need a total of 17 per side. So get busy making lots of flying geese. You're also going to connect them together like this, putting them together with the white background rectangle in the center to create that corner unit. Just stitch that together, and that's how you create the corners. So put it all together, follow the instructions in the pattern, and I'll meet you back here when you're ready to stitch it onto the fabric panel. So here is the flying geese pieced border for one side of the quilt, and I have pieced together 17 flying geese. The next step is to fold it in half and find the midpoint. So I'm just lining up these corners, keeping those edges together, smooth it down and find that midpoint, and it's going to be right in the center of one of the flying geese. And I'm going to mark that with a pen. So now I have that midpoint marked, and I did the same thing with this edge of the quilt top. I folded it in half, lined up the corners, and I have the midpoint marked right here. So now I can take the border and flip it over, and I can line this up with those two midpoints right on top of one another. So that's just exactly lined up right. And I'm going to move the pins so that they are now pinning through both fabrics. So now, this is one of those things that's tricky, and I'll be honest, pieced borders are like my least favorite thing to piece because they never seem to fit just exactly right. And here's the trick that I found works really well. If I started down here and started piecing, and maybe something went funny right here and I didn't have enough fabric of either the border or the quilt, then I would end up trying to force those things together, those edges together through here until I hit the pin. The solution is to start on the pin and to sew down, allowing those pieces to come together. And you have all of this edge all the way to the corner to make sure that the two edges line up smoothly together. Whenever I'm piecing a regular plain border, just a strip of fabric, I rarely cut it exactly and I rarely pin. So pieced borders are a little bit of a challenge. Let's take this machine and see if it works. So I went on ahead and pieced one side of the border in place, working from the center to the outer edge, and it worked out great. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to drop my needle down and bring the bobbin thread up to the top. That just stops the bobbin thread from making a mess on the back of the quilt. You know, that could eat up seam allowance. That could cause a noticeable blip on the edge of your quilt. So it's important to pay attention to those threads. So now I'm going to get started stitching, and I'm just lifting up on that quilt panel, and also I'm double checking my seam allowances on that flying geese border, that they're not flipping over, doing anything weird on the back. And I'm just making sure that that panel stays in perfect alignment with the edge of that pieced border. And once I get some of this stitched and I can kind of pull back on the quilt, I zoomed out here so you could see this. I can pull back on the quilt and make sure that my corner is pinned just exactly right. And I can kind of pull back on this and just see how things are lining up. And what I'm looking for is any excess fabric on either side, whether the pieced border might be coming in a little small or a little big, or that quilt panel could be coming in a little small or a little big. And I'm just smoothing it out. I have this whole length to ease out any issue. And easing just simply means kind of slightly stretching the shorter fabric to fit the longer fabric. You know, it's ease. It's not forcing it, it's not stretching it out of shape. It's very gentle. And I'll be honest, there is a limit to how much you can ease the fabrics together. I would say that limit is probably around 1/8 of an inch. If you have more than a quarter, definitely a half, you would not be able to ease the two fabrics together. It just isn't going to work. You want to double check before you start piecing that your pieced border and the edge of your quilt are the same size, and they should both measure 34.5 inches. So here I'm right now working my way towards the end, and I can still feel just a little bit of excess fabric here, not a lot. So that's why I'm putting just a little bit of pressure here with my index finger pulling down. What that's doing is just kind of easing the two fabrics together so they're lining up the same rate. The one that's a little short, which is the piece border, is ever so slightly stretching, but not enough to stretch it out of shape. And so now as I come down towards the pin, everything's going to line up just exactly right. Take that pin out and stitch off the edge. The next step, I like to press that seam allowance open on the back, and I'm able to do that because I piece with a really short stitch length. I piece at 1.5 millimeters. That produces a really tight, secure stitch, so I can press all of those seam allowances open. So you can see I've pieced both borders to both sides, and I have the flying geese going up on one side and down on the other side. I think that looks really cute. So now I can continue that pattern with the top edge. So this is what I'm going to do next, and that is to piece this pieced border along this top edge. Now again, just like before, we need to make sure that this is going to fit, and we're going to stitch it from the middle to the outer edges, and we have a few more things we need to line up. We need to line up these seam allowances from where we attach the border to the flying geese on the sides. We want that to line up with this point on those corner squares. We want that to line up just exactly right. So I'm going to fold this in half and find the midpoint. The midpoint this time happens to fall on a seam, so I know that's where the midpoint is there. I'm going to fold the whole quilt in half and find the midpoint here. And just fold it in half, make sure those corners are just exactly stacked up on top of one another, and give it a little crease right in the middle. So now I'm going to flip over that border so it's right sides together with the fabric panel. I'm going to line up that center seam with that crease line, make a pin there, and then also line up this seam line where the block came together with the seam line where the border on the sides connected with the panel. And I want that to line up exactly right. I'm just pinning right ahead of those seams so that way when I'm stitching down, I can stitch right up to that pin and take it out at the last minute. So just like before, I'm going to start in the center and stitch to the outer edges. Go back to the center and stitch to the outer edge. That way I know the border is going on just as smoothly and evenly as possible. So I'm getting started in the middle, stitching on down, just the exact same way we did the other one. And I already, as I have a needle in it, I can kind of be taking a look down here at where I have my pin placed and how things are lining up, and it's looking pretty good right now. This is one of those things about pieced borders, because you have so many units coming together for the border and then you have the quilt, things can be off, you know. Seam allowance is something that varies for a lot of people, even for me. And I can tell I have maybe just a little bit more fabric here in the panel, the quilt panel, than I do in the pieced border. So I'm just trying to ease that extra fabric over this whole long length rather than waiting until it gets right here up next to my pen, because I don't want to move my pen. That would throw off that seam, and that would be more noticeable than like stitching a very small pleat in the edge of the quilt. And sometimes if you just manipulate the fabric and play with it, by the time you reach the pen, it's all going to be kind of just sorted itself out. So now I'm lining up this pieced flying geese with the edge of that corner block, making sure all of that's in good alignment all the way through. Carefully stitch right up to my pin, and my seam allowances kind of like to wing up on me, so I always stop and double check that just to make sure that they're staying put. And then now again I'm going to make sure everything is lined up. It's stop and check things, you know. It's never a waste of your time to slow down and just make sure everything is going to come out just exactly right. That looks good. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning how to attach a pieced border to your quilt top. This is the exact same method that I would use if I was piecing a border to a bigger quilt or a pieced quilt. It works the exact same way, and I think it really turned out pretty. I call this Geese in the Wildflowers, and you can find the quilt pattern to turn your wildflower panel into this quilt at leahday.com/wildflower. If you'd like to learn more about QuiltyBox, check it out in a link below this video. It's a great way of getting new tools, supplies, and beautiful fabrics every single month. And each month I challenge myself to use the materials in my QuiltyBox so I don't end up stashing and saving them. I use them up every month. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you don't miss the next video coming out soon. Until next time, let's go quilt!